The space around Nexus Prime looked like a graveyard. Thousands of broken ships floated in the darkness, their metal hulls torn open and twisted. Some were large Council warships, others were smaller fighter craft. All of them were dead now, just cold metal drifting in the void. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the wreckage spin slowly past the viewing window. His forearms were crossed behind his back, and his scaled face showed the tiredness that came from fighting a war for 30 long years. The Zephyrian officer had seen too many battles, lost too many friends, and watched too many worlds burn. The tactical display in front of him showed red dots scattered across the star map. Each red dot was a Vorthan ship or base. There were so many of them. After 3 decades of fighting, the enemy seemed stronger than ever. Their black ships moved through space like hunting beasts, and their weapons could tear through the strongest Council shields. "Admiral, we're receiving another distress call from the Kepler system," said his communications officer, a young Zephyrian named Velik. The officer's voice was steady, but Kextar could hear the strain underneath. They all felt it now, the weight of a war that seemed to have no end. Kextar nodded but did not turn around. "Send what ships we can spare. It won't be enough, but we must try." He had said those same words hundreds of times before. The Council always tried, but it was never enough against the Vorthans. Across the galaxy, on the massive Council ship, Sovereign Dawn, Ambassador Valona received the same news. The crystalline collective representative looked like living glass, her transparent body catching and reflecting light in beautiful patterns. But today, those patterns were dull and gray, showing her deep sadness. The Council chamber was filled with representatives from 12 different species. There were the insect-like arachnids with their clicking voices, the energy beings called ethereals who glowed with soft light, and the rock-like granite people who spoke in rumbling tones. All of them had been fighting the Vorthans for 30 years. All of them were tired. "The reports from the front lines are not good," Valona said to the assembled council. Her voice rang like crystal bells, but the sound was hollow. "We have lost another battle fleet at Rigel 7. The Vorthans used their new shield technology again. Our weapons could not break through." Commander Zalath of the Arachnid Federation made a clicking sound of anger. His multiple eyes glowed, red in the dim light of the chamber. "How many more ships must we lose? How many more worlds must burn before we find a way to stop them?" The answer was always the same. No one knew. The Vorthans had started this war by attacking peaceful trading posts along the galactic rim. At first, the Council thought it would be a short conflict. The Vorthans were just one species after all. How could they stand against the combined might of 12 advanced civilizations? But the enemy had surprised everyone. Their technology was unlike anything the Council had seen before. Their ships had shields that could absorb massive amounts of energy. Their weapons could cut through the strongest armor like it was paper. Worst of all, they seemed to have unlimited resources and endless numbers of ships. Every time the Council mounted a major offensive, the Vorthans would counter with something new. New weapons, new defenses, new tactics that caught the Council forces off guard. The war had become a brutal stalemate, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. On the bridge of his ship, Admiral Kextar received a message that made him pause. It was from a system called Sol, far out on the rim of the galaxy. The message was simple and direct, sent in basic galactic common language. To the Galactic Council, "We are humans from the planet Earth. We have heard about your war with the Vorthans. We want to help. We request permission to join the Council and offer our assistance." Kextar stared at the message for a long moment. Humans. He had never heard of them. His ship's computer searched the galactic database and found only a basic entry. The humans were a young species that had only recently discovered faster-than-light travel. They had fought many wars among themselves on their home planet, but they had never been involved in galactic politics. The Admiral forwarded the message to the Council with a short note. "Another species wants to join the war effort. They appear to be primitives from a backwater system. Recommend standard diplomatic courtesy but do not expect significant military contribution. In the council chamber, the human message caused quite a stir. Some representatives laughed openly. How could a species that had barely left its own solar system help in a war that had defeated the galaxy's most advanced civilizations? They still use chemical rockets for some of their space travel, said Councillor Trixon of the Ethereal Communion. His glowing form pulsed with what might have been amusement. Their largest warships are smaller than our escort frigates. What could they possibly offer? Commander Zeleth was less diplomatic. We have been fighting the Vorthons for 30 years with the best technology and tactics known to the galaxy. These humans have been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. They would be slaughtered in the first engagement. But Ambassador Valona held up one crystalline hand for silence. Perhaps we should not dismiss them so quickly. We have tried everything else. Maybe a fresh perspective is exactly what we need. The debate went on for hours. Some council members argued that accepting the humans would only give them more casualties to worry about. Others pointed out that any help, no matter how small, was better than none. Finally, Councillor Trixon made a suggestion. Let them come. Let them see what we face. When they understand the true nature of this war, they will either run home or find some small way to contribute. Either outcome is acceptable. The council voted, and the humans were granted permission to send a delegation. Meanwhile, in a distant part of Vorthan space, Emperor Zormek received his own intelligence reports. The Vorthan leader was tall and imposing, with dark skin that seemed to absorb light and eyes that glowed like burning coals. He ruled his empire with absolute authority, and he had been winning this war through superior technology and ruthless tactics. The Council has accepted another species into their alliance, reported his intelligence chief, General Carden. They call themselves humans. Our spies indicate they are primitives with limited technology. Emperor Zormek smiled, showing teeth, like black glass. Let them come. One more species to crush will only make our victory more complete. The Council grows desperate if they are accepting children into their ranks. Neither the Emperor nor the Council truly understood what was coming. The humans were indeed young compared to the other galactic species. Their technology was simpler, their ships smaller, their weapons less advanced. But they had something that the galaxy had not seen in a very long time. They had fresh ideas. The human delegation was already on its way, traveling in a modest ship called the UES Liberty. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his bridge and looked at the star chart showing their route to Council space. His crew was small but experienced, veterans of the recent conflicts that had finally united Earth under one government. Captain, will reach the Council rendezvous point in 6 hours, reported his navigator, Lieutenant Sam Parker. The young officer looked nervous. They all did. This was humanity's first real contact with galactic civilization, and they were walking into the middle of the biggest war in galactic history. Captain Morrison nodded. Thank you, Lieutenant. Signal the crew to prepare for Council contact protocols. And Sam, try not to look so worried. We're here to help. Behind him, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes was reviewing the intelligence reports that Earth had managed to gather about the war. What she saw made her frown. The conflict had all the signs of a stalemate, with both sides using the same basic strategies over and over again. Maybe, she thought, it was time for someone to try something different. The UES Liberty dropped out of hyperspace near the Council's main fleet base at Alpha Station. Captain Jake Morrison looked through the viewing window and felt his breath catch in his throat. He had seen pictures and video recordings, but nothing had prepared him for the real thing. The space station was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. Ships from a dozen different species moved around it like insects around a bright light. There were sleek Zephyrian cruisers with their curved hulls that looked like giant sea creatures, crystalline collective vessels that sparkled like cut gems in the starlight, massive granite people ships that looked like flying mountains. Captain, we're being hailed by station control, said Lieutenant Sam Parker from his position at the communications station. His voice carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness that everyone on the bridge felt. Put them through, Morrison replied. He straightened his uniform and tried to look more confident than he felt. This was humanity's first official contact with galactic civilization, and he did not want to mess it up. The face that appeared on the main screen belonged to a Zephyrian officer. The alien's scaled features and forearms made him look intimidating, but his voice was polite when he spoke. UES Liberty, this is Alpha Station Control. You are cleared for docking at Bay 7. Welcome to Council Space, humans. We have been expecting you. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes stood beside Morrison's command chair, reviewing the data that was streaming in from the station's information networks. What she saw made her eyes widen. The casualty reports from the war were worse than Earth's. Intelligence services had estimated. Entire fleets had been destroyed in single battles. Some star systems had been completely evacuated because they could not be defended. Captain, she said quietly, I think we might be in over our heads here. Morrison nodded grimly. Maybe. But we're here now, and we gave our word. We'll do what we can. The Liberty docked at Alpha Station without incident. As the human delegation prepared to disembark, they could see alien crew members working on damaged ships in the other docking bays. Some of the vessels had holes burned completely through their hulls. Others were missing entire sections, held together by emergency force fields and prayer. Admiral Kextar was waiting for them at the docking port, along with a small honor guard of council officers. The Zephyrian admiral looked tired, but he greeted the humans with proper military courtesy. Captain Morrison, I am Admiral Kextar of the Council Fleet. On behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome you and your people to our cause. Morrison saluted in the human style, then extended his hand for a handshake. Kextar looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out with one of his forearms to clasp it briefly. Thank you, Admiral. We're honored to be here, and we're ready to help however we can. Kextar's expression suggested he had doubts about how much help the humans could actually provide, but he was too polite to say so directly. Instead, he gestured toward a transport vehicle waiting nearby. Come. The Council is eager to meet with you and discuss how your people might contribute to our war effort. The ride through Alpha Station's corridors gave the humans their first close look at the diversity of galactic civilization. They passed shops run by floating energy beings, workshops where insect-like arachnids repaired damaged equipment with their multiple arms, and recreational areas where different species tried to relax despite the ongoing war. But everywhere they looked, the humans could see signs of the conflict. Medical facilities were overcrowded with wounded soldiers from a dozen different species. Memorial walls displayed the names of the dead in scripts and languages from across the galaxy. Even in the civilian areas, people moved with the careful tension of those who had lived with war for too long. The council chamber was impressive. A vast circular room with seats arranged for representatives of all member species. When the humans entered, they could feel dozens of alien eyes studying them with curiosity and skepticism. Ambassador Valona of the Crystalline Collective rose to address them. Her transparent form caught the light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls, but her voice was serious when she spoke. Humans of Earth, we welcome you to the Galactic Council. We understand you wish to help us in our struggle against the Vorthan Empire. Before we discuss what role you might play, you should understand what we face. What followed was a detailed briefing that left the human delegation stunned. The Vorthans were not just another hostile species. They were a military machine unlike anything in galactic history. Their technology was decades ahead of the Council's best equipment. Their tactics were ruthless and effective. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to have unlimited resources. Commander Zaleth of the Arachnid Federation spoke next, his multiple eyes glowing with anger as he described the enemy's capabilities. Vorthan ships carry shields that can absorb the full firepower of our battle fleets without failing. Their weapons can penetrate our strongest armor as if it were made of paper. In 30 years of war, we have never captured a single piece of their advanced technology intact. Every time we think we understand how to fight them, they reveal some new capability that changes everything. Captain Morrison listened carefully, taking notes on his personal data pad. Beside him, his tactical officer, Commander Ryan Burke, was doing the same. Their systems analyst, Dr. Amy Watson, was recording everything for later analysis. When the briefing was finished, Counselor Trixon of the Ethereal Communion floated forward. His glowing form pulsed with what might have been sympathy. As you can see, this is not a simple conflict between equals. The Vorthons have advantages that we do not fully understand. We appreciate your offer of help, but you must understand that many species more advanced than your own have tried and failed to find a solution. It was not said unkindly, but the message was clear. The humans were welcome to try, but no one expected them to succeed where others had failed. Dr. Watson was the first to speak for the human delegation. We understand the situation is difficult, but sometimes an outside perspective can see things that those close to a problem might miss. We'd like to study your intelligence reports, tactical analyses, and battle records. Maybe we can find something that hasn't been tried yet. Commander Zaleth made a clicking sound that might have been amusement. You are welcome to review our files. We have 30 years of data on Vorthon capabilities and tactics, but I warn you, every military mind in the galaxy has studied this information. What makes you think you will see something they missed? Commander Burke answered with quiet confidence. Because we're human. We think differently than you do. On Earth, we've spent our entire history fighting wars with limited resources against superior enemies. We've learned to find weaknesses that others might overlook. Admiral Kekstar studied the humans with new interest. There was something in their manner that suggested they were not as naive as they appeared. They had not seemed surprised or intimidated by the briefing. Instead, they had listened with the careful attention of experienced soldiers evaluating a tactical situation. Very well, the Admiral said finally. You will be given access to all our intelligence data. You will also be assigned quarters on Alpha Station and provided with whatever support you need for your analysis. But I must ask, what can your people contribute militarily? Your ships are small, your weapons are primitive compared to what we face. Captain Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving at the station. Admiral, we may not have the best technology in the galaxy, but we have something else. We have the largest industrial capacity of any species currently in Council space. When we decide to build something, we build a lot of it, and we build it fast. Lieutenant Commander Hayes pulled out a datapad and showed the Council representatives some figures from Earth's recent military buildup. The numbers made several of them sit up straighter in their seats. In the past 6 months since we first learned about your war, Earth's shipyards have been working around the clock. We've built over 800 combat vessels, with more coming off the production lines every day. They're not as advanced as Vorthon ships, but they don't have to be. Ambassador Valona's crystalline form flickered with interest. You are suggesting a strategy based on numbers rather than technological superiority. Exactly, Morrison replied. Sometimes quantity has a quality all its own. Dr. Amy Watson had been staring at data screens for 3 days straight. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, and empty coffee cups littered her temporary workspace on Alpha Station. But she had found something that made her heart race with excitement. Around her, the other members of the human delegation were buried in their own research. Commander Ryan Burke was analyzing 30 years of battle reports, looking for patterns in Vorthon tactics. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes was studying supply chain data that most military planners considered boring, but essential. Captain Jake Morrison was coordinating with Earth's industrial centers, trying to understand exactly what humanity could contribute to the war effort. But it was Dr. Watson who made the breakthrough that would change everything. Captain, she called out, her voice hoarse from too much caffeine and too little sleep. You need to see this. Morrison looked up from his own datapad and walked over to Watson's workstation. The screen was filled with technical specifications and chemical formulas that meant nothing to him, but Watson's expression told him this was important. What did you find, Amy? Watson pointed to a series of charts showing the composition of Vorthon ship hulls, weapons, and shield generators. Look at this. Every single piece of Vorthon technology has one thing in common. They all contain significant amounts of an element called trilithium. Morrison frowned. Never heard of it. That's because it's incredibly rare, Watson explained, pulling up a galactic resource map. As far as we can tell, trilithium only occurs naturally in 3 star systems in the entire galaxy, and all 3 of those systems are controlled by the Vorthons. The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. You're saying their entire technological advantage depends on one element? Not just depends on it, Watson said, her excitement growing. According to these technical analyses, trilithium degrades rapidly when exposed to normal space conditions. Vorthan ships need constant resupply of fresh trilithium to maintain their shields and weapons at full power. Commander Burke looked up from his own workstation. How constant? Watson checked her calculations again. Based on the energy outputs we've recorded from Vorthan ships, I estimate they need to replenish their trilithium supplies every 2 to 3 weeks, maybe less during heavy combat. The room fell silent as the humans processed this information. After a moment, Hayes spoke up. So, if we could cut off their supply of trilithium, their ships would lose power, Morrison finished. Their shields would fail, their weapons would become useless. Burke was already pulling up tactical displays of the 3 trilithium-producing systems. Kepler Mining Complex, Rigel Extraction Facility, and Vega Processing Station. They're spread across different sectors of Vorthan space, each one heavily defended. Morrison studied the displays with growing excitement. How heavily defended? Very, Burke replied. Each system has at least 50 major warships, plus orbital defense platforms, fighter squadrons, and ground-based weapon installations. The Council has tried to attack these facilities before, but they've never had enough ships to mount a serious assault on even one of them. But we do, Morrison said quietly. The other humans looked at him with surprise. Hayes was the first to speak. Jake, even with our new production capacity, we don't have enough ships to take on 3 heavily fortified systems simultaneously. Morrison smiled, the same smile he had worn when explaining human industrial capacity to the Council. Lisa, you're thinking like a Council military planner. You're thinking about building ships that can match Vorthan vessels one-on-one. He walked over to the main display and pulled up specifications for the new human warships currently being built in Earth's orbital shipyards. These ships aren't designed to match Vorthan technology. They're designed to overwhelm it. Each one costs about 1/10 what a Council cruiser costs to build. They carry simpler weapons, lighter armor, and basic shields. But we can build 10 of them in the time it takes the Council to build one of their advanced warships. Watson caught on first. Swarm tactics. Exactly, Morrison replied. The Vorthans have designed their defenses to handle traditional Council military doctrine. Large fleets of expensive, heavily armed ships attacking in formation. But what if instead of sending 100 advanced warships, we send 1,000 simple ones? Burke was running calculations on his datapad. The numbers might actually work. If we hit all 3 trilithium facilities at exactly the same time, the Vorthans won't be able to reinforce any of them. And if we use enough ships, even their superior technology won't be able to stop us. Hayes was still skeptical. It would require perfect coordination. The timing would have to be exact. If even one facility survives, they could redirect their remaining trilithium to their most important ships and counterattack. Then we make sure all 3 facilities are destroyed, Morrison said simply. Over the next several hours, the humans worked out the details of their plan. It was ambitious to the point of seeming impossible, but the more they studied it, the more feasible it appeared. The key was Earth's industrial capacity. While the Galactic Council had spent 30 years trying to match Vorthan technology ship for ship, humanity had been perfecting mass production techniques. Human shipyards could produce simple, effective warships at a rate that would have seemed impossible to other species. When they were ready, Morrison called for a meeting with the Galactic Council leadership. Admiral Kextar, Ambassador Valona, Commander Zalith, and Counselor Trixon gathered in a secure briefing room to hear what the humans had discovered. Dr. Watson presented her findings about trilithium dependency. The alien officers listened with growing amazement as she explained how the entire Vorthan war machine relied on constant supplies of a single rare element. "This is remarkable," Ambassador Valona said, her crystalline form flickering with excitement. "In 30 years of war, none of our scientists identified this weakness." "To be fair," Watson replied, "you've been focused on trying to match their technology. We've been looking for ways to defeat it without matching it." Commander Zaleth's multiple eyes were focused intently on the tactical displays. Even if this analysis is correct, attacking all three facilities simultaneously would require a fleet larger than anything the Council has ever assembled. We simply do not have the ships. Morrison stepped forward. But we do. What followed was a detailed explanation of human production capabilities that left the alien officers stunned. In the months since joining the Council, Earth's shipyards had been working around the clock, producing vessels at a rate that seemed impossible by galactic standards. "You have built over 1,500 warships in 6 months?" Admiral Kextar asked, his scaled features showing disbelief. 1,800 as of this morning, Commander Burke corrected, with more coming online every day. By the time we're ready to launch this operation, we should have over 2,000 ships available. Counselor Trixon's glowing form pulsed with what might have been confusion. How is such rapid production possible? Even with automated systems, ship construction requires months of careful work. Hayes answered with a slight smile. You're thinking of building ships the way the Council builds them, individual works of art, each one carefully crafted with the most advanced technology available. Human ships are different. They're designed for mass production. She pulled up technical specifications for the new human frigates. The alien officers studied them with growing understanding. These vessels are much simpler than Council standard designs, Admiral Kextar observed. Simpler, cheaper, and faster to build, Morrison agreed. They don't need to be as advanced as Vorthon ships. They just need to be numerous enough to overwhelm Vorthon defenses. The briefing continued for several more hours as the humans explained their tactical doctrine. Instead of trying to match the enemy's technological superiority, they would defeat it through sheer numbers and coordinated attacks. Ambassador Velona was the first to fully grasp the implications. You are proposing to end this war not through superior technology, but through superior strategy and production capacity. That's exactly what we're proposing, Morrison replied. The question is, are you willing to try something completely different from everything the Council has attempted before? The alien officers looked at each other, communicating in ways that humans could not fully understand. Finally, Admiral Kextar spoke for all of them. Captain Morrison, if your plan works, you will have accomplished something that the greatest military minds in the galaxy have failed to do for 30 years. If it fails, we will lose a significant portion of our remaining fleet. Morrison nodded, grimly. I understand the risks, Admiral, but I believe this plan will work. And right now it might be the only chance we have to win this war. The attack began at exactly 0800 Galactic Standard Time across 3 different star systems. For the first time in 30 years of war, the Galactic Council was taking the fight directly to the heart of Vorthon power. Admiral Susan Clark stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Defiance, watching as 2,000 human warships dropped out of hyperspace around the Kepler mining complex. The sight was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before. Instead of the careful formations that Council fleets usually maintained, the human ships spread out like a swarm of angry insects. All ships, this is Admiral Clark, she broadcast on the fleet communication channel. Remember your assignments. We have one job today, and that's to shut down this facility permanently. Stay focused, stay coordinated, and we'll all go home. Heroes. The Vorthon response was immediate and devastating. The mining complex's orbital defense platforms opened fire with weapons that could destroy a Council cruiser with a single shot. Brilliant beams of energy lanced out across the darkness of space, and human ships began to die. But for every human ship that was destroyed, 10 more took its place. The Vorthons had built their defenses to handle traditional Council tactics, where losing a single advanced warship was a major disaster. They were not prepared for an enemy that could afford to lose hundreds of ships and keep attacking. Lieutenant Dan Foster piloted his fighter through a storm of enemy fire, his hands steady on the controls despite the chaos around him. His squadron had been assigned to take out the complex's shield generators, and he could see his target ahead through the explosions and debris. Red leader to Red Squadron, he called over his radio. I count 6 shield generators on the main platform. We take them out in pairs. Remember, we only get one shot at this. Foster's fighter shook as enemy fire passed close by, but he held his course. Behind him, Captain Michelle Brooks led her own squadron of bombers toward the trilithium processing plants that were the real target of the attack. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Clark watched the battle unfold on her tactical displays. The human losses were heavy, but they were within acceptable limits. More importantly, the Vorthon defenses were beginning to weaken under the constant pressure. 3,000 light-years away, at the Rigel extraction facility, Captain Tony Reed was leading a very different kind of attack. Instead of the direct assault that Admiral Clark was conducting at Kepler, Reed's force was using stealth and infiltration. The key to Reed's plan was captured Vorthon shuttles that his intelligence team had acquired through months of careful preparation. The small craft looked exactly like the supply ships that regularly visited the extraction facility, and Vorthon sensors could not tell the difference. Major Kate Sullivan sat in the cramped cabin of one of these disguised shuttles, checking her equipment one final time. Around her, 30 human Special Forces soldiers prepared for what might be the most dangerous mission of their lives. "Remember, people," Sullivan said quietly, "we need to get inside that facility and plant our charges without being detected. Once those trilithium refineries are destroyed, every Vorthon ship in this sector will start losing power within hours." The shuttle docked with the extraction facility without incident. Vorthon security was focused on the space around their installation, not on routine supply deliveries. Sullivan and her team slipped aboard the station wearing stolen Vorthon uniforms and began making their way toward the refinery levels. The inside of the facility was like nothing the humans had ever seen. Massive machines processed raw trilithium, ore into the refined element that powered the Vorthon war machine. The air hummed with energy, and strange lights pulsed through transparent tubes that carried the precious material throughout the complex. Sullivan's team split into smaller groups, each one heading for a different section of the refinery. They had studied the facility's layout for weeks, but being inside the actual structure was still overwhelming. Everything was built on a scale that seemed designed to intimidate. At the third target, the Vega processing station, Admiral Paul Johnson was conducting the most dangerous part of the entire operation. His fleet was smaller than the other two, but his mission was just as critical. The Vega station was the most heavily defended of the 3 trilithium facilities. It was also the newest, with the most advanced Vorthon technology protecting it. Johnson's ships faced weapons and shields that were even more powerful than those at the other 2 locations. "Sir, we're losing ships faster than projected," reported his tactical officer, Commander Tim Walsh. "The Vorthon defenses here are stronger than our intelligence indicated." Johnson nodded grimly. He had expected this. Vega was where the Vorthons tested their newest military technology before deploying it to their main fleets, but that also made it the most important target to destroy. "Continue the attack," he ordered. "Signal the volunteer squadrons to begin their runs." What happened next would become legendary in human military history. Throughout the human fleet, pilots who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of all began their final approach toward the Vega station's critical systems. Lieutenant Carol Hayes, the younger sister of Lisa Hayes, was one of these volunteers. She piloted her fighter directly toward the station's main power core, ignoring the defensive fire that lit up space around her. "This is for Earth," she said into her radio, then triggered her ship's self-destruct sequence and ejected at the last possible second. Her fighter, along with dozens of others, slammed into the Vega station's shields and armor with the force of small nuclear weapons. The Vorthons had never faced kamikaze tactics before, and their defenses were not designed to handle attackers who were willing to sacrifice their ships to ensure their targets were destroyed. Back at the Kepler mining complex, Admiral Clark watched as the facility's defenses finally began to collapse. The shield generators that Lieutenant Foster's squadron had been targeting exploded in brilliant flashes of light, leaving the mining platforms vulnerable to direct attack. "All bombers, this is Admiral Clark," she broadcast. "The shields are down. Begin your attack runs on the primary trilithium storage tanks." Captain Michelle Brooks led her bomber squadron through the gap in the Vorthon defenses. The trilithium storage facilities were massive structures that held enough refined element to power hundreds of Vorthon warships. Destroying them would cripple the enemy's ability to maintain their technological advantage. Brooks's bombs found their targets with deadly accuracy. The storage tanks erupted in explosions that could be seen from hundreds of kilometers away. Secondary explosions followed as the chain reaction spread throughout the facility. At Rigel, Major Sullivan's infiltration team had successfully planted their charges throughout the extraction facility's refinery levels. As they prepared to evacuate, Sullivan activated the detonation sequence that would destroy the facility from within. "Charges armed," she reported over her communicator. "All teams get to the evacuation shuttles now." The explosion that followed tore the Rigel facility apart from the inside. Without the refinery to process raw trilithium ore, the Vorthans would lose 1/3 of their total production capacity immediately. Admiral Johnson's attack on Vega was the last to succeed, but it was also the most complete. The volunteer pilots who had sacrificed their ships to breach the station's defenses had created gaps that the rest of the fleet could exploit. When the Vega processing station finally exploded, it took with it the most advanced trilithium processing equipment in Vorthon space. By 1100 hours, less than 3 hours after the attacks began, all 3 trilithium facilities had been destroyed or severely damaged. The effects on the Vorthon war machine were immediate and catastrophic. Across Vorthon space, ships that had terrorized the galaxy for 30 years suddenly found their shields failing and their weapons losing power. The element that had given them their technological superiority was no longer available in the quantities they needed. On his flagship in the Vorthon home system, Emperor Zormek received the reports with growing disbelief. In less than 3 hours, these primitive humans had accomplished something that the combined might of the Galactic Council had failed to do in 30 years of war. "How many facilities have we lost?" he demanded of his intelligence chief. "General." Cardan's voice was barely above a whisper when he replied, "All of them, my lord. The humans have destroyed our entire trilithium production capacity." The Emperor stared at the tactical displays showing his fleets across the galaxy. Ships that had been invincible just hours before were now vulnerable, their power levels dropping rapidly as their trilithium supplies ran out. For the first time in 30 years, the Vorthon Empire was losing the war. The first Vorthon ship to surrender was the dreadnought Dark Victory, which had terrorized Council space for over a decade. Admiral Kextar watched in amazement as the massive black warship's shields flickered and died, leaving it defenseless against a small squadron of human frigates. "Sir, the Vorthons are requesting terms of surrender," reported his communications officer, barely able to hide the excitement in his voice. Kextar had been a military officer for 40 years, but he had never seen anything like what was happening across the galaxy. Ships that had seemed invincible just hours before were now floating helplessly in space as their power systems failed. The mighty Vorthon war machine was collapsing like a house of cards. On the bridge of the UES Liberty, Captain Jake Morrison received similar reports from across all 3 attack zones. The trilithium facilities had been completely destroyed, and the effects were spreading through the Vorthon fleet faster than anyone had predicted. "Captain, we're receiving surrender. Requests from 17 different Vorthon vessels," Lieutenant Sam Parker announced from his communications station. "What should we tell them?" Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the locations of Vorthon ships throughout the galaxy. Red symbols that had represented deadly threats just hours ago were now blinking yellow as their power levels dropped below combat effectiveness. "Put me on an open channel to all Vorthon forces," Morrison ordered. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet, speaking for the Galactic Council. To all Vorthon ships and installations, you have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally or face destruction. Your choice." 3,000 light-years away in the Vorthon capital system, Emperor Zormek stood in his throne room watching reports flood in from across his empire. Every single one told the same story. His fleets were powerless, his weapons were failing, and his 30-year reign of terror was coming to an end. General Cardan entered the throne room with his head bowed in defeat. "My lord, we have lost contact with 70% of our fleet. The remaining ships are reporting critical power failures. Without trilithium, our weapons and shields are useless." The Emperor's burning eyes fixed on his general with fury. "How did this happen?" How did these primitive humans accomplish what the Council could not do in 30 years? Carden had been asking himself the same question. They thought differently than we expected, my lord. Instead of trying to match our technology, they found our weakness and exploited it. Their strategy was unlike anything we had prepared for. Emperor Zormek walked to the great window that looked out over his capital city. For 30 years he had built an empire through superior technology and ruthless tactics. Now, in less than 5 hours, it had all been taken away by a species that most of the galaxy considered primitive. What are their terms? He asked quietly. Unconditional. Surrender, my lord. Complete disarmament of all military forces. Occupation of key systems by Council peacekeeping forces. War crimes trials for military leadership. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Outside his window he could see Vorthon civilians going about their daily lives, unaware that their empire was collapsing around them. Many of them had never known anything but war. What would happen to them now? Send a message to the Council, Zormek said finally. Tell them that the Vorthon Empire surrenders unconditionally. On Alpha Station, the news of the Emperor's surrender was met with celebrations that could be heard throughout the massive structure. Species that had been at war for 30 years suddenly found themselves at peace. Soldiers who had expected to die in battle were going home to their families instead. Ambassador Valona stood before the assembled Galactic Council, her crystalline form glowing brighter than anyone had seen in years. The war is over, she announced, her voice ringing like crystal bells throughout the chamber. After 30 years of conflict, the Vorthon Empire has surrendered unconditionally. The cheering that followed seemed to go on forever. Representatives from 12 different species celebrated together, their various forms of joy creating a symphony of relief and happiness that echoed through the station. But it was Admiral Kextar who spoke the words that everyone was thinking. The humans did it, he said, his voice filled with wonder. They ended a war that we could not win. Captain Morrison and his delegation were invited to address the Council for the final time. As he stood before the assembled representatives, Morrison felt the weight of what they had accomplished. Billions of lives had been saved, entire starry systems had been spared from destruction, and the galaxy would finally know peace. Members of the Galactic Council, Morrison began. Today marks the end of the longest and most devastating war in galactic history, but it also marks the beginning of something new. Humanity is honored to have played a part in bringing peace to the galaxy. Counselor Trixon's glowing form pulsed with what was clearly gratitude. Captain Morrison, your people have accomplished something that military experts said was impossible. How do we thank a species that has given us back our future? Morrison smiled. You don't need to thank us. We're all part of the same galaxy now. What threatens one of us threatens all of us. What benefits one of us benefits all of us. Dr. Amy Watson was appointed as the head of the new Galactic Strategic Planning Division, tasked with preventing any future conflicts from reaching the scale of the Vorthon War. Commander Ryan Burke began training alien officers in human tactical doctrine, teaching them to think outside traditional military frameworks. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hayes took charge of the peacekeeping forces that would occupy former Vorthon territory during the transition to a new government. It was a massive responsibility, but the humans had proven they could handle challenges that seemed impossible. The rebuilding process took years, but it was guided by principles that the humans had brought to galactic civilization. Instead of punishment and revenge, the focus was on rehabilitation and integration. Former Vorthon territories were gradually brought into the Council as equal members, their people given the chance to build new lives in a peaceful galaxy. Some Vorthons, like former General Carden, chose to work with the occupation forces. Carden himself admitted that he had learned more about military strategy from studying human tactics than he had in decades of conventional warfare. Your people fight with their minds as much as their weapons, he told Commander Burke during one of their planning sessions. We focused so much on building better technology that we forgot the most important weapon of all, creative thinking. 5 years after the war ended, Captain Morrison stood on the observation deck of the new Unity Station, a massive space platform built jointly by humans and their former enemies. Through the viewing window, He could see ships from dozens of different species working together on peaceful projects. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The war that had seemed endless was now just history. Children from a dozen different worlds grew up knowing only peace, their parents' struggles becoming stories told to help them understand how precious that peace was. Dr. Watson often said that the real victory had not been military but philosophical. The galaxy had learned that there was always another way to solve problems, no matter how impossible they seemed. Sometimes it just took someone thinking differently to find the solution. Admiral Kextar, now retired, wrote in his memoirs that the humans had taught the galaxy the most important lesson of all, that superior technology was no match for superior thinking. The Vorthans had built better weapons, but the humans had built a better strategy. As Morrison watched the peaceful ships moving through space, he thought about the message that humanity had sent to request permission to join the war effort. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but it had been less than 6 years. The galaxy had been at war for 30 years when humanity joined. The war had ended in 5 hours, not because humans were better fighters, but because they were better thinkers. They had looked at an impossible situation and found a way to make it possible, and in doing so, they had given the galaxy something it had almost forgotten how to hope for: a future without fear.